Thank you for joining me for Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation Holocaust Education Podcast Series. I am joined today by Kathy Sweedler, a personal finance educator with the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. She has worked in a variety of roles with the University of Illinois Extension since 2001 and is also now working part-time with Gies College of Business Community Outreach to help people prepare their taxes through the VITA program. Kathy, thank you for joining me today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for hosting this podcast.
Kathy, let's start with a little bit about yourself. Tell me about where you grew up, where you attended school, and why are you in Champaign-Urbana? What brought you here?
So I grew up in a relatively small town on the central coast of California, pretty ag-oriented. Went off to college at University of California at Davis, where I met my husband, Jonathan Sweedler. Then we went over to Arizona, University of Arizona for graduate degrees, popped back over to California for a couple of years, and then ended up in Illinois. Luckily, I think, because my husband got a job at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And we have been here for about 33 years, and I have no plans to move away.
Your career path was rather interesting as well, though. Can you just walk us through a little bit of what led you down the path to the Gies School of Business?
Sometimes people like to have their whole life planned out, and I've just sort of been lucky to fall into different things and take advantage of opportunities that arose. So I had taken a few years off. I have 3 sons and had taken some time to stay at home with them. And then through some networking, I was contacted because the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics was looking for somebody to teach personal finance, and they had heard I was in town. I said, sure, I'll do that. And then from there, they offered me another part-time job, and I was very lucky to be able to work part-time, changing hours, overtime for many years while my sons were younger. And then it's evolved into full-time work as what we call the consumer economics or personal finance educator, where I did community education in the community, really different numbers of counties, but around here. And then recently, after I stopped that job, I was volunteering at a VITA site, which is IRA-sponsored free tax assistance for people, and then was asked if I wanted to be the site coordinator last year. So I have a new role with the Gies College of Business and am thoroughly enjoying that.
And the aforementioned 3 boys are no longer in the house?
No, they are not. They're in their 30s, but I'm very lucky that they live close. 2 of my sons live in town and one lives up in Hyde Park, so I get to see them quite frequently.
Flash forward, and how did you get connected with the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation?
Well, this is kind of a funny story in the sense that I have a friend who is the director of the McKinley Foundation here in town, and she was looking for some people to help docent a recent art exhibit at the foundation, the Auschwitz Experience in the Art of Prisoners. And I said, oh, sure, I could do that. And so I went through the docent training that Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation provides and did the docent activity. And then kind of in those conversations, somebody brought up the podcast. I think it was advertised there. And then somebody said, oh, would you like to do a podcast with us since your family are survivors of the Holocaust? And I was like, sure, let's do it.
Which is easier said than done, because as we get into your family's story, can you tell me a little bit about your family's history? What part of Europe were they in and how they were affected by the Holocaust?
Both of my parents are Jewish. And my father's family, though, came to America early 1900s out of sort of the Ukraine area in a general sense. My mother's family, though, had lived in Berlin since the 17th century, again, as Jews. My mother was born in Berlin in 1935. So her family was very much impacted by the Holocaust. Now, I do know that actually I'm simplifying things and that my father's family was also definitely impacted, but I don't know those people. So the people I know are the ones that we'll be talking about today would be more the Berlin side of the family.
Okay, so this was your mother, born in 1935. When was the first time that your mother shared her ordeal with you?
That's an excellent question. It was really maybe my grandmother, my mom's mother, Ula, who talked about it with us more. When she would take care of us as little kids, she would tell us stories about her and her siblings and how they lived in this big house and had this beautiful garden and all their adventures, because there was quite a few of them. And it was like a fairy tale to me. But then we would say, well, where is this brother of yours, Rolf? Well, he died in the Holocaust. Or where is your sister Ruth? Well, she died in the Holocaust. We always, I think, knew about it. My mother was able to get to London, the immediate family, her parents and her. And there they had to go through the bombings and the rationing. And I think that's the part I heard from my mother more was just how scary that was and how difficult it's always been for her, for example, to hear planes go overhead and things like that. So it wasn't really like there was a moment they sat down and told us the story.
A lot of survivors tend to spare their descendants and they don't talk about it. That seems to be a common thread. So I appreciate that your mother passed some stories on to you and that you're here sharing them with us today. Let's talk about her experience living through London bombings. Does she remember that, or did that just shape her, as you said, when she heard loud noises, she was reactive?
I think it definitely shaped her. She was there from the time she was 3 until 12. So, school age. And I think she really felt that London was her home. There are a few stories, that I can think of. For example, my sisters and I all remember her saying she knew exactly how far to walk, where if the sirens went off, that there was going to be a bombing, whether she should go home or she should run to school. Like, which way should she go? That's just a very good example of how practical in the midst of war sometimes people are, but yet what a thing to have on a child to know which direction they need to run to get safe.
Did you grow up knowing your grandparents? Because they would have also had stories.
Yes, so my grandfather passed away when I was young, but my grandmother lived right near us for most of my life. We would hear about it from her, but also her sister Etta was also living in Arroyo Grande where I grew up for several years. And even though she was the one that went to the concentration camp, was one that wanted to tell people about it and would talk about it more. And so I did talk to her about it. Early on, I like to do genealogy, and I was interested back when I was 10 or so. And I would ask questions, and grandma would always answer me, but then she would tell me, but after we talk about it, she would have nightmares for several nights. I think very quickly I was like, well, I don't really have to know all the family details if it's going to cause that kind of grief. And I just stopped asking.
Did anybody write it down? Did your grandmother have a diary? Did your mother write things down?
From that time period, I am not aware of anything that my mother or grandma wrote at the time. My mother has written about it since, but there were a lot of letters that went from my great aunt to my great grandmother, Irmgard, while even my aunt was in the concentration camp. There were letters that went back and forth that were kept, and those people have looked at carefully for information and a sense of what was going on.
Do you happen to know what their thought process was in choosing Los Angeles from London?
Yes, that one I do know. My grandfather's mother and stepfather had ended up in LA. This is kind of a cute story. My grandmother it was her second marriage, my great grandmother's, and the last name, George Domke. She went through supposedly all the New York phone directories to find a Domke and called and said, would you sponsor us? They were not related. They didn't know him, but they did sponsor them. So they came and they ended up in LA. So I don't know why they ended up in LA, actually. That's a good question. Once the war had finished, my great grandmother really wanted her only son and her only grandchildren to come to LA. And so they did move to LA and, in fact, moved in with my great grandmother and her husband in a small 2-bedroom bungalow where the adults had each other a bedroom. My mother and her sister shared a bed in the living room. That was also traumatic for my mother in the sense that, moving when you're 12, that's always going to be a bad age. And then moving to a new country and then moving into a household where there was pretty tense. There were a lot of fights about money, about how children were raised, about expectations. That was very hard. That was also just a whole nother step. And I think it took quite a while for my mom to warm to America.
And we're going to fill in the gaps again. I want to jump forward a little bit. Did you notice different ways that life stayed with her? Did she ever acknowledge it, or did you observe it, or later you realized, oh yeah, that was probably because of her early trauma?
She actually talks about the trauma of that time period. That was pretty clear, just because the tensions between the generations were so, and just being in a small place. And I will say, though, long term, my mother went on to college, her sister went on to college, my mom became a veterinarian, third class at UC Davis that took women, so things did work out at that level for my mom, and she was able to go to college. But many of the years while she was growing up, they really didn't have any extra money. Actually, most of the years. So that was one of the things that we need to keep in mind about the Holocaust and all kinds of refugees is that people really struggle. They really don't have financial resources, they don't have support systems, and it can be that whole process of being a refugee can be very difficult. So Germany had annulled their citizenship back, I think, in 1939 or so. And so my mother didn't have citizenship anywhere until she was able to get US citizenship when she was 18 as an independent adult. That probably was a pretty interesting feeling to not have citizenship anywhere.
Earlier, you mentioned several of your grandmother's family members were killed in the Holocaust. What do you know about their names or who they were to you? Can you talk a little bit about that?
The things the family told, the stories in things. And one of the things that happened in the last few years is that a researcher from the United Kingdom got interested in our family. And she went around and did interviews with a lot of family members and wrote that up. And actually, a lot of stories came out that most of us didn't know because you hear stories in such interesting ways, right? They come down a certain way. Well, I have a cousin from part of this family that's in Sweden, and she heard stories coming down from a different line, from, a different sibling, essentially, a sibling of my grandma. And her stories are different than the stories I heard, or the interpretation of events is different. One of the things I think we always have to keep in mind when we hear stories, they're important. They're a way of communicating what happened, but everybody has a different lens, a different perception. And so, one of the things I wanted to bring out too is that I'm talking about how I saw things as I grew up and as I am today. But my mom and her sister are both alive, and they might not agree with my perception. And they might still say, oh no, it was really like this. So, I think we have to keep that in mind that each person brings themselves to these stories.
You yourself grew up in a small town without a lot of Jewish connections there. Can you talk a little bit about your childhood?
Sure. We grew up, the Levine sisters were one of two families that went to my high school. I always felt sorry that everybody thought that was the only thing they would know. I did go to temple for some Saturday teachings when I was young. The rabbi came to our house for a year or two. But basically, we didn't interact with other Jewish people that weren't family. So I think we always consider ourselves coming from Jewish heritage and customs, but we just didn't have a Jewish community per se.
Did you find that you had a strong Jewish identity or you struggled to find it since you didn't have a lot of people to connect to with it?
I'm not sure. I think we have a pretty strong Jewish identity in some format. When I say we, I meant my sisters and I, but it's different for each of us. There's no doubt that I would say I have a Jewish background. It becomes clear as you interact with other people that many things that you don't realize are Jewish customs or part of the culture. When you see another family, you're like, oh, I guess that is a Jewish thing. It was just the way we were. That was how it was. But usually people don't let you be not Jewish. So as soon as somebody knows that you come from a Jewish background, you are a Jew. That's my opinion, my experience.
One of the reasons I ask is because you come from a lineage of interfaith marriages. Okay, let me see if I get this straight. Your great grandmother was a Christian Quaker who married your Jewish great grandfather, and her only brother was a Nazi official. Can you talk about how your family has come to terms with all of that? How did that shake out as the family tree went down?
My great grandmother's family and my great grandfather's families had been friends for a long time, but when they wanted to marry each other, everybody wasn't on board with that. And so my great grandmother did have to wait till she was, I believe, 25, but whatever the age was that you had to be to get married. Maybe it was 21. I'm sorry. Then the children, which would have been my grandmother and her siblings, they were raised Jewish, but they also had Christmas in the household and wear of both faiths for sure. And then, of course, the Holocaust happened, and then they were Jewish. Then I actually defined it for some of them, is that that's the way it went. Then, actually, one of the surviving great uncles actually did convert to be Catholic. So that's a whole nother story. But anyway, so I think we've definitely had that interfaith marriage and tolerance throughout the family that's carried down from there. The Nazi uncle was sort of another whole thing. I don't think the family was terribly surprised, probably because that side of the family kind of leaned that direction. But on the same side, I don't think anybody really forgave him for it either.
Do you have memories as a child of family or relatives or people that you met that had been in concentration camps? Had you had those conversations with people directly in the camps?
Yes, so my great aunt Etta was in the camps for 3 or 4 years. She was in Terezin and survived it. And she was at my wedding. She lived in my town for several years. We visited her in Chicago when she lived there before. I definitely had conversations with her about it.
Are those conversations that you initiated or she felt that you should know?
One time when we visited and we were looking for graduate schools, we went to her place in Chicago. She said something, and I must have said something like, "Well, Grandma never told me." And she said, "What?" I mean, she was very taken back that I didn't know these family stories. And so the next couple of hours, she just told us all kinds of stuff that had happened and how she survived and how brave her mother was, having her children and her husband killed while she was a Christian Quaker and wasn't part of being sent to the Holocaust, but suffered in other ways, in many ways. Yeah, we had a lot of conversations about that. But Etta had such a positive view of life. She was an artist. She was excited to see and do different things. And truly, she didn't really forgive everybody or think that it was all fine, but she was determined to go forward.
Did any of your family ever return to Germany?
So there was a younger sister of my grandmother who did go back to Germany. As far as I know, that would have been the only sibling that did of my grandmother's in order to facilitate reclaiming property that the Nazis had taken. So the family was pretty wealthy and a lot of property had been claimed by the German government, and there was a big effort to get retribution from that. And Judith took the lead on that. Then I did go back as an adult for a variety of reasons, and I've been back a couple of times, but most of my family has not gone back.
As a child of people who did survive it, and the granddaughter and the niece, what words would you use to describe how you feel about it, how connected you are to their past? How does it make you feel as somebody who didn't directly live it, but you know your family did?
I think that hopefully it makes me more empathetic to immigrants and refugees today to understand that horrible things happen and they happen around the world in different ways. And we don't always know what somebody's gone through or what their family has gone through, or if their family was enslaved somewhere and then they've had to deal with that. And just to know that people keep stepping forward, like you just take the next day and you keep living it. And I remember my great aunt Etta saying, when we came to America or to England, nobody wanted to talk about what we had gone through. We just felt like we should just put it behind us and live our lives and keep going. And it wasn't till later in her life that she really, I think, started talking about it publicly. So I think hopefully it's just made me understand that people go through horrible things sometimes.
Does it make you nervous what's happening right now in America with immigrants?
I would say that there's a lot going on right now that makes me nervous about authoritarianism and about immigrants. And I think we need to be very careful what freedoms we lose. One of the things that you had brought up in some notes to me earlier was, how did the family know about warning signs? And I think I've heard people say, why didn't people just leave? Why did it go where it went? I think that the warning signs, they start out small. You can only go to a Jewish school. You can't go to the school your children might have wanted to go to, or you have to wear a star. You can no longer work your job the way you were working it, but you could modify it and serve just Jewish people, but not general public. And so all these things were step by step. Oh, you can't own property now. Okay, well then how does that look? It's step by step, and all of a sudden you have no rights left.
Does it look like that's where we're headed?
I hope not. I hope we're a strong enough democracy that I don't believe that's where we're headed, really. But I think we need to be careful that we don't lose rights and that we speak out.
Did your sons ask questions and were they fascinated by their family's history? Or is this generation more, I don't want to hear about it, it's upsetting?
They have asked questions about it. There was an excellent conversation. My grandmother was an artist and she had painted a large piece of art depicting kind of her life and working through all the Holocaust pieces. It was sort of a biographical piece. And she was working on it one time when we visited, and my sons asked her a lot of questions that I hadn't dared to ask, right? Like it's just another generation distance, it's easier. And they had a really excellent conversation. And I think they remember the conversation, if not all the words per se, but just the feel of it. I've brought that art piece to our house, and there's already been discussions about it because they each want it. So I think they do feel very connected to it, but on the other end, they don't really know the people at that same way.
A researcher has written publicly about your family, and now you are part of the academic world. You see your family's history now in official writings, not just in family anecdotes. What does that feel like?
That's a little weird, to be totally honest. I think part of it is just that it's interesting to have somebody that's not family kind of telling the family story, put it all down in words and things. And so that's been a little bit difficult because sometimes perceptions, again, or how it's written up can seem a little odd. But the reality of it is she's doing excellent work. And her research is very good. She's done a lot of deep dive into documents and interviews, and she's writing things that people need to read about and to know about. So she's very interested in sexuality in the concentration camps. She's interested in how during the Holocaust people's economic situation changed, how they ended up moving across the world. And that's kind of where she got interested in our family, I think, is because people just scattered to different continents, to different areas. And so our family became a very good kind of piece of way to tell the story around her thesis. But yes, it's out there now. It's like very interesting.
Anyone who is a descendant of Holocaust survivors has their own story. If somebody's interested in telling their story, what is the best advice you can give them and how to do that?
Stop and think. When we started talking about doing a podcast, I thought, well, this is not my story. This would be like my grandmother's story or my mother's story. So what's my story? But there's two things. One, we need to talk because we still can. We're here and we can tell the stories. But also, you do connect with history differently when your family is a part of it. And so there are things that we have to share. So I think that it is just very important to acknowledge that you have a connection to this history, even if it feels a little stepped out compared to like somebody that just lived it.
As an educator, what is something you are still surprised by when people discuss the Holocaust? Is there anything that still surprises you at this point?
Sometimes I do run into people who don't believe the Holocaust happened. That always surprises me. I like to talk about the Holocaust as one form of intolerance that was very extreme, but to remind people that if they can't relate to that, if they're not comfortable with the way politics are going or something, to keep in mind that there's other examples of intolerance around the world that we can think about and think about how these things start and what can we do to help. So it's not just about the Holocaust, but sort of intolerance in a big way. So I think that's kind of where I'm surprised sometimes is that people seem to have trouble. Maybe they don't want to connect to the Jewish part of the Holocaust. Okay, fine. Then connect to something else, but understand that we need to study how people treat each other.
You can remind them that homosexuals were also targeted in the Holocaust. It wasn't just the Jewish part.
Homosexuals, gypsies, people that were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, citizens of countries that were being invaded. It was much broader than just the Jews, of course.
And last question before I let you go. As an educator, what would you like the succinct message to be to kids in school about what they're learning about the Holocaust? What do you want the most important thing to come out of Jewish education?
I think a couple of things. One, awareness that these things happen so that we can stop them early. So we don't have to recreate the awareness. And two, people made a difference individually during the Holocaust to save people, to help people. And you cannot minimize the individual efforts. They're important.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about your family that I don't want you to walk away today and say, you know what, I should have shared that about my mother, my grandmother, my aunt?
I guess one of the things that I've found very interesting when I've done family genealogy research is how valuable DNA testing is because we have found family we thought had died in the Holocaust, like whole lines with lots of people now, and only because we connected through DNA. We had honestly just thought they had died. That part is kind of positive and fun.
Kathy Sweedler, thank you so much for being part of the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation Holocaust Education Series. I'm so grateful for your time today.
Thank you.